2 weeks ago, I was just riding my skateboard down the street, minding my own business, something I've done 100 times before, something that's completely legal in my neighborhood. But one woman, Helen Parker, decided that my hobby was a personal attack on her way of life. She confronted me repeatedly, told me to stop, and when I didn't comply with her self-appointed authority, she did something unhinged. She grabbed my skateboard out of my hands and snapped it in half with her foot. That board had been with me since I was a kid. When I refused to back down and held her accountable, she sued me for $2,500, claiming I'd injured her ankle and ruined her life. What she didn't expect was that Judge Porter would see the security footage, watch her lie under oath, and realize that sometimes the real Karen isn't the person on the skateboard, it's the person who thinks she owns the entire neighborhood. This is what happens when someone mistakes nosiness for authority. Hi, I'm Eddie Mendoza, the skateboarder who took down a neighborhood tyrant in court. I think you'll really want to hear how this played out, and I'd love to know what you think about my story. When you're done, drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm 22 years old, and I've lived in the Clearwater Hills neighborhood for about 3 years. It's a quiet suburban area, mostly older homes with families scattered throughout, the kind of place where people generally mind their own business. Or at least, they're supposed to. Skateboarding has been my thing since I was 9. My dad bought me my first board, and we used to go to the skate park together every weekend. He passed away when I was in high school, and that skateboard became more than just a toy to me. It became a connection to him, a way of maintaining our bond. Over the years, I've upgraded and gotten better equipment, but I still ride the original board he gave me whenever I can. The neighborhood has sidewalks and streets, and technically, skating on sidewalks isn't illegal. Plenty of people jog, walk their dogs, and use the public pathways without incident. I'm careful when I ride. I don't go insanely fast on crowded sidewalks. I'm aware of pedestrians. I yield to people walking with kids or elderly folks. I've never hit anyone. Never knocked anyone over, never caused any actual damage or disruption, but then Helen Parker moved into a heightened state of neighborhood awareness, and suddenly my hobby became a neighborhood crisis in her mind. Helen Parker is the type of woman who has opinions about everything, and she's not shy about sharing them. She's probably in her 60s, has dyed red hair that's styled in a very deliberate way, and always wears this expression like she's personally disappointed by how the world is running. She dresses like she's on her way to a church committee meeting, even when she's just walking around the neighborhood. Within the first few weeks of her becoming hyper-aware of my existence, she started making her presence known. She'd see me riding past her house and would come to her front door or garage to stare. She'd mention my skateboarding in conversations with other neighbors in a way that suggested I was some kind of menace. Then one day, she actually confronted me directly. "You need to stop skateboarding in this neighborhood," she announced, like she had the authority to issue neighborhood-wide bans. I was confused. "It's not illegal," I said, trying to be respectful. "It's dangerous," she countered. "There are children here. There are elderly people. You're endangering everyone." I tried to explain that I was careful, that I wasn't going excessively fast, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. But Helen had made up her mind. She decided that my skateboarding was a threat to neighborhood safety, and that she, as a longtime resident who did charity work and community service, had the moral authority to tell me what I could and couldn't do. Over the next few months, Helen's campaign against my skateboarding escalated. She'd stand in her driveway and yell at me as I rode past. She'd follow me on her own walks, making a point to document my movements. She complained to other neighbors about me. She'd mention how dangerous it was, how irresponsible I was, how I clearly had no respect for community standards. Never mind that I wasn't breaking any laws. Never mind that I was courteous to pedestrians. Never mind that there was nothing inherently wrong with what I was doing. Helen had decided I was a problem, and she was going to make me see things her way. There was one incident that Helen would later use as evidence of my recklessness, an encounter with Mrs. Dawson, an 80-year-old woman who walks her Chihuahua, Binky, every morning. I came around a corner a bit faster than I should have, and Mrs. Dawson and I both got startled. I immediately stopped and profusely apologized. I was genuinely upset that I'd scared her. Mrs. Dawson, being the kind person that she is, told me not to worry, that it was just a common accident, that anyone could have done the same thing. She wasn't angry. She didn't demand compensation. She simply accepted my apology and moved on. But Helen, who witnessed this from a distance or heard about it secondhand, weaponized it. She decided that this single moment of near collision was proof of my essential danger to the neighborhood. Then came the incident that escalated everything. I was riding down the street one afternoon, just cruising, not doing anything extreme or dangerous. Helen saw me and came rushing out of her house like she was responding to an emergency. "I told you not to skate in our neighborhood," she shouted, her voice filled with righteous anger. I kept riding, honestly confused about what she thought she had the authority to enforce. That's when Helen did something that shocked me. She ran toward me, and without any hesitation or restraint, she literally grabbed my skateboard out of my hands as I was riding. But she didn't just grab it. She took it, looked at it with fury in her eyes, and then with strength that seemed impossible for someone of her apparent physical capability, she stomped on it like she was in a wrestling match. The board cracked and snapped in half. Just like that, the skateboard my father had given me, the one I'd had since I was 9 years old, was destroyed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This grown woman had just destroyed my property in what could only be described as a fit of rage. I was angry, heartbroken, and honestly stunned by her behavior. I asked her why she would do something like that. She started yelling about how I refused to listen to her, how I was endangering the neighborhood, how I deserved what happened. She seemed to genuinely believe that she had the right to destroy my belongings if I didn't comply with her demands. That's when I realized this wasn't about neighborhood safety anymore. This was about control. Helen wanted to control what I did, and when I wouldn't submit to her authority, she took matters into her own hands and destroyed something irreplaceable to me. I decided I needed to document what was happening because Helen's behavior was becoming increasingly irrational and aggressive. I started keeping my phone on me when I rode, and I had actually captured footage of the incident where she destroyed my skateboard. When Helen sued me for $2,500, claiming that I'd injured her ankle by running over her with my skateboard, I knew her claims were false, but I also knew that her word against mine might not be enough in a courtroom. That's why I was grateful I had the video evidence. The court date was set for a Thursday morning, and I showed up nervous but prepared. Helen arrived with her own narrative already firmly in place. She told Judge Porter that I was a reckless menace who endangered elderly people and children. She claimed that I'd run over her foot with my skateboard, causing her to sprain her ankle severely. She showed the judge a brace on her ankle. She complained about her broken nails, about how her injuries had prevented her from attending charity events and getting proper manicures. She painted a picture of a woman whose entire life had been disrupted by a careless young skateboarder who refused to respect neighborhood norms. Judge Porter listened to her testimony, but I could see him taking mental notes. When he asked her to clarify exactly how I'd injured her ankle by running over it with a skateboard, her story started to get fuzzy. She talked about sprains and swelling. When he asked about her nails, she mentioned that they'd gotten chipped and broken, but when he asked how that happened, if I'd run over her foot, she couldn't quite explain the connection. Then Judge Porter asked the critical question, "So how did your nails get damaged?" Helen struggled to answer. She talked about stress and strain, about the whole situation being traumatic. But she couldn't explain how a skateboard running over her ankle would damage her fingernails. Judge Porter pressed further. "Did you fall?" he asked. "Not really," Helen admitted. That's when he asked if she'd come to court with crutches, noting that if her injury was severe enough to warrant a $2,500 claim, you'd expect to see some physical evidence like crutches. Helen had none. She was walking fine. There was no visible limp, no use of mobility aids, nothing that suggested severe ankle trauma. Judge Porter then turned to me and asked what happened from my perspective. I explained that I was riding my skateboard, that I'd never hit Helen, that she'd actually grabbed my board out of my hands while I was riding and then stomped on it. When Judge Porter asked if I had evidence of this, I said yes, I had video footage on my phone. Judge Porter asked me to approach and show him the video. I did, and he watched the footage carefully. What the video showed was exactly what I described. Helen confronting me, grabbing my skateboard, and then deliberately stomping on it with enough force to snap it in half. You could hear her voice in the video, yelling about how I refused to listen to her. You could see the skateboard cracking under her foot. You could see my stunned reaction as my childhood possession was destroyed in an instant. Most importantly, the video clearly showed that Helen was the aggressor, not me. When Judge Porter finished watching the video, he looked at Helen and said something that made the entire courtroom go quiet. The woman in that video looks exactly like you and sounds exactly like you. And that's you in the video, isn't it? Helen's face went pale. She tried to deny it, but Judge Porter wasn't having it. He told her plainly that she could either admit the truth or continue to lie under oath, but the video evidence was irrefutable. Finally, confronted with video proof that she was lying, Helen broke down. "All right, I lost my temper and I stomped on it," she admitted. "I threw it down and my nails broke." Judge Porter's expression hardened. "You got one more time to raise your voice in my courtroom, or you're going to spend the day in jail. Am I making myself clear?" Helen quieted immediately. Judge Porter then pointed out what should have been obvious from the beginning. "You lied to me. That's what you did. You lied about how the board was broken. You lied about the injury to your ankle. You lied about how your nails got damaged." Judge Porter reviewed the medical report Helen had brought to court. It confirmed that she did sustain a sprain to her ankle, but it didn't say that the sprain was caused by me. In fact, the doctor's report was dated after the incident, and the details were vague. Judge Porter pointed out what was obvious from the video. The sprain most likely came from Helen's own actions, specifically from stomping on the skateboard with enough force to break it. When she stomped with her full weight on a rigid wooden board, her foot and ankle took the impact. That's how she injured herself. Judge Porter then asked Helen a direct question. "How did you end up with his skateboard in your hands?" She admitted that she'd taken it from him, that she'd grabbed it right out of his hands and then destroyed it. Judge Porter seemed genuinely disappointed by her behavior. "You're a grown woman," he said. "This young man has done nothing illegal. He has every right to skateboard on the sidewalk in his neighborhood. You don't have any authority over him just because you've lived here a long time or because you do charity work. And you certainly don't have the right to destroy his property because he refuses to submit to your self-appointed authority." He explained that while skateboarding on sidewalks does require awareness of pedestrians, what Eddie was doing was legal and not inherently dangerous. A skateboard is actually safer than a bicycle or a motorcycle, Judge Porter noted. The kid isn't obstructing traffic. He's not breaking any laws. He's not hurting anyone. You're the one who hurt yourself by destroying his board. Judge Porter made it clear that he found Helen's behavior to be self-serving and immature. He pointed out that she was a grown woman behaving like a child, trying to enforce rules that didn't exist, and punishing a young man for doing something that was completely legal. "I don't know what you have against skateboarders," he said. "I don't know what your issue is, but you broke that young man's skateboard, so you're going to pay for it." He asked me how much the skateboard had cost, and I told him, honestly, that it was about $500. It was a decent board, quality equipment that I'd invested in over the years. Judge Porter nodded and made his ruling. "The court is going to grant you $500 for the skateboard and an additional $500 for the pain and suffering that you had to endure at the hands of her behavior." Helen's face went red. She looked like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Judge Porter then issued Helen a warning that was as clear as it could possibly be. "I am going to give you this warning," he said, making direct eye contact with Helen. "You see this young man skateboarding? You see anybody skateboarding. Unless they are getting ready to knock you out of the way while you're walking on the sidewalk, leave them alone. If they're in the street doing tricks, leave them alone. Like I said earlier, if he's not impeding traffic, why do you even care? Am I making myself clear?" Helen nodded silently. Judge Porter continued, "I just hope that he doesn't knock down Miss Dawson next time." "Well, apparently he's already spoken to Miss Dawson, and he's made good with her. And Binky, is it?" He'd remembered the dog's name from Helen's testimony. "Yes, Binky," I confirmed. "Well, scared Binky the Chihuahua," Judge Porter said, with a slight smile. "I know. But next time, hey, bring Miss Dawson in here. Maybe we can get her side of the story. But you're going to pay that $1,000. Helen tried to argue that she shouldn't have to pay, that the ruling was unfair, that my skateboarding was the real problem. But Judge Porter wasn't interested in hearing anything else from her. "Your case is dismissed," he said flatly. "You're going to pay this young man $1,000, and you're going to stop harassing him about his skateboard. That is the end of this discussion." The courtroom had gone completely silent. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Not only had Judge Porter vindicated me, but he'd also made it clear that Helen's behavior was inappropriate and that she needed to stop. As I left the courtroom, I held the pieces of my broken skateboard in my hands. It would never ride the same again, even if someone tried to repair it. But now, at least, Helen would have to pay the consequences of her actions. The word spread through the neighborhood fairly quickly. People started to understand what had actually happened, and more importantly, they started to see Helen differently. Some neighbors who'd previously been sympathetic to her complaints about my skateboarding realized that her issue wasn't really about safety, it was about control. A few neighbors even approached me to say that Helen had complained about their activities too. A man whose teenage son had friends over too often. A woman whose garden had too many bright flowers. Someone whose car was the wrong color. Helen had opinions about everything and had been making people's lives difficult by trying to impose her will on the entire neighborhood. After the court ruling, Helen became increasingly isolated in the community. Some neighbors who'd previously listened to her complaints stopped engaging with her. People didn't wave at her the way they used to. She wasn't invited to neighborhood gatherings the way she had been before. She'd wielded her concerned neighbor persona as a tool to build social status and influence, and now that people understood what that persona really masked, she found herself without the social currency she'd been using to maintain her position of informal authority. I continued to skateboard in the neighborhood, but I was more aware of Helen watching from her driveway, no longer able to do anything about it. A few weeks after the court case, I saw Helen talking with Mrs. Dawson, the elderly woman with the Chihuahua. Mrs. Dawson seemed polite but distant. Whatever charm Helen had tried to exert before no longer worked. Mrs. Dawson knew the truth now, and knowing the truth had changed everything. Helen had used her concern for the elderly to justify her complaints about my skateboarding, but now that elderly neighbor could see through the justification to the real motivation underneath. Helen simply wanted control, and she was willing to use anyone's concern for their own well-being as a weapon to get it. Within a few months, Helen stopped making public complaints about my skateboarding. She still watched from her driveway sometimes, still made faces when I rode past, but she no longer tried to physically confront me or yell at me. She'd learned her lesson the hard way through a public courtroom where her lies had been exposed and a judge had sided completely against her. Judge Porter's ruling did more than just vindicate me. It sent a message to the entire neighborhood about the difference between legitimate community concerns and one person's need to control everything around them. Sometimes the person who claims to care most about safety and community standards is actually the person most interested in wielding power over others. Sometimes the biggest threat to a peaceful neighborhood isn't a skateboarding kid doing tricks, it's a grown woman who can't accept that she doesn't have authority over everyone around her. I still ride my skateboard through Clearwater Hills. I'm still careful around pedestrians. I still respect elderly folks like Mrs. Dawson and maintain awareness of families with children, but I do it now knowing that I'm within my rights, that the law is on my side, and that if someone tries to interfere with my legal activities again, I have recourse. Helen Parker taught me an important lesson about standing up for myself and not accepting someone else's self-appointed authority over my life. She also taught me that sometimes you need to document things, to have evidence, to be prepared to show the truth when someone else is lying. Judge Porter taught me that there are still people in positions of authority who will take time to understand what's really happening and will side with justice rather than with whoever claims the loudest that they're concerned about community welfare. So that's my story. I was just a kid riding a skateboard. Helen Parker decided that was a threat to neighborhood safety. I refused to stop. She destroyed my board, and then she lied about it in court. What happened next? A judge who actually paid attention, watched the video evidence, and made her pay for her actions and her lies. Now, I'm curious, what do you think about Helen's behavior and Judge Porter's ruling? Do you think he was fair? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let me know what you think about this story.